Alright, everybody. Going to be doing some gaming and some rambling. Because I've got some things that I kind of want to talk about, and just, you know, no one really to talk to about them, so, why not put my thoughts out there on the internet? Today I'm going to be talking about just the state of employment in this country, specifically customer service employment, because that's what I have the most experience with. But I think that a lot of this applies to most most companies that hire people, which pretty much all of them. It's not going to be really much structure to this as I play, because and I might get distracted, so bear with me on that. But I just kind of wanted to get my thoughts out there, because I figure better than keeping it all wrapped up in my own head, that I might actually do me better to kind of talk it out. I kind of do that with my friends and let them talk to me, so I figure, why not? So let's go ahead and get started here with the biggest problem I have. The catalyst for this, of course, is that I lost my most recent job. That happens, and the circumstances are, well, they're stupid, but at least I get them anyway, which a lot of times you don't even have that as far as reasoning goes. I'd like to start, at the hiring process, because that's where most things start. And one of the biggest problems I have with the hiring process at most places, especially retail outlets, like your big box stores like Walmart and Kmart, and even some of your smaller ones, like, say, dollar stores, not to name names. But the first thing that really bugs me is this little aptitude test that they give you whenever you apply for one of these places. And it really bothers me that anybody with a brain can realize, anybody with half a brain really, can realize that the entire purpose of this test is to weed out the people that are dumb enough not to lie. And yes, that's exactly how I feel about it when it comes down to it. Because that's really what they're doing. They're encouraging you to lie to them, to find out if you have the brains to at least know what they expect. Which I kind of understand that, but I still don't like the way they go about it. See, after you've done your regular, job employment things, like, putting in your information, past experience, yada yada, all that interesting junk, you have to take this test, and it basically set up as this long test, way longer than it needs to be. And they ask you questions like, how you would handle certain situations, and things about your, your outlook, the way you work, things like that. Things like your general disposition. And if you're not smart enough to know that you have to lie, you cannot put your true feelings into this, it's just not feasible. So, and the worst part is they kind of rephrase everything. Really, they couch everything in different words. I'll ask you the same question like 4 or 5 times, just with a different wording, different phrasing. They'll change like the tense of it, change the subject from you to something else, and it's really dodgy in my opinion. I don't like it. But the worst part of the whole thing is that if you do tell them what they want to hear, you're either like not a real person because nobody feels the way they want you to feel. And if you do, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be that way about things, but it's just that I've never met a real person that actually thinks the way these companies want you to. So if you do, like, more power to you, I guess. But you know, whatever. Um, of course, going with that, it's like moving along to actually getting hired. Like, say you actually do get hired and, you have the good sense to lie about the things they want you to be on par with, then one of two things happens. Either you're a good employee and, while you don't necessarily agree with all the things that they want you to say, you at least know enough and care enough about having a job to, be a good employee. You come to work every day, you don't steal from your employer, and, everything is okay, for better or worse. So once you got that out of the way, you have a job, right? But it seems like there's a lot of companies out there, and probably rightly so to a certain extent, that seem like they penalize their employees for things that are far beyond their control. And they treat pretty much all of their employees like they're a bunch of thieves, which, I'm sure they have legitimate reasons for a lot of these, but I think they take it way too far, in a lot of cases. Like, my last job, one of the reasons I was fired is that there's this policy in place. And in with reasonable oversight, I could see it being a safeguard against thievery, which, every retail outlet, every company has a problem with, at least to some extent, and it's something that they have to combat. But, the actual wordings of the policy is one of those things that it's so strict and it's so asinine that it hardly makes any real sense when it comes down to it. It's so strict that it just and it's unnecessarily strict on, the lowest of the low level employees, which apparently most companies think are thieves. So, again, I'm sure that most companies have some experience, something that they can point to and say this is why this policy exists. But it doesn't account for a lot of accidents, things that many employees, the good employees, don't have any control over. And it bugs me so much that the immediate thing is, hey, these accidents are happening, and we can't necessarily prove that you're stealing from us, but that's the assumption we're going to make. It's blanket sort of accusal, and while I'm sure that those companies don't see it that way, it's definitely how it comes off. It's just how things are phrased, and it's how things kind of end up, I guess. And moving right along, one of the biggest problems that people are having right now is wages, which, I get the different sides of the argument. I really do. Like, I understand that maybe you wouldn't want you wouldn't think that somebody flipping burgers, maybe that's just a stopgap job. Maybe that's what it's meant to be. You don't really see specifically the reason for them to have, like, a $15 an hour wage. And I kind of get that. I kind of get it. Because you look at other jobs that are really important, like ambulance drivers, emergency medical technicians, people that do, like, important work and risky work. And you wonder, why a burger flipper wants the $15 and why should they deserve it. But at the same time, it's like, there's such a thing as a living wage. And unfortunately, not many people actually get a living wage. Like, I don't want to blame any particular, aspect of the world for this or that. I'm not qualified for that. But what I can say, and what bugs me, is that it's been how many years since the minimum wage went up? And the cost of living just keeps going up. That's, always going to happen. That's just how economies work, from my understanding of that. And I do a lot of, like, armchair research about things. It's a hobby of mine. I like to research things and try to figure out stuff. So I've done enough research to kind of know how economies work. And one thing that seems to me keeps happening is that the cost of living keeps going up, but most companies are so profit-centric and so, self-centric in that way, so profit margin focused that it's almost incomprehensible to them, at least the way they come off, to pay their employees more money, that, it's ridiculous. The lowest level employees get the shittiest wages. And, you might think that's logical. Okay, yeah, they're low-level employees. They have to work their way up to a better pay. And I want to say that's fair, but I really just don't think that it's, in practice the way it should be. At least that's the way I feel like it is, honestly. Having worked in a lot of these places, a lot of these retail outlets, and a couple of, we'll say, a restaurant, some janitorial services, we'll say. And one of the things that I've noticed is that regardless of how well an employee works, it's not necessarily in the interest of the companies, or at least their self-interest anyway, to raise the wages, because that detracts from their profit margin. And, I've heard the argument, oh, you raise the wage, then you have to raise the prices. Not really. Because the more, the logical argument to that is that the more people have in their pockets to spend, the more they're going to spend, and that, of course, is going to drive up the amount of money put into the economy, which I agree with. Having done the research and listened to the arguments, that seems fair. At least, in my eyes, it seems fair. And there are so many tax loopholes that these companies seem to exploit, or at least from my understanding, they seem to exploit them, that there really shouldn't be any issue with raising employee wages. But then again, we have this sort of equality-centric pay ethics, which I think hampers the ability of people to get paid a wage that really suits them. There used to be a time in this country where you actually got paid according to your ability and your work ethic. My grandfather was in the e-retail industry for a very long time, the longest time, really. He only retired like 10, maybe 15 years ago. And that's, long enough for a gentleman of his age. But one of the problems he faced is that on his way out, or maybe even prior to that, was that there was a change in pay culture to have less of an impact as far as the company's payroll is concerned. And one of the first things that tends to get cut when it comes to, the budget is employee payroll, which, it might seem like the logical thing to the CEO or to the operating officer or the payroll department, but, really you're just impeding your employees' ability to deal with the things that come at them in their lives. So it's not a thing that really gets the attention it deserves. So you have this culture of, the first thing we have to do if we want to cut costs is, make sure that we can cut down on the amount of money we're paying people, which I think is asinine. Why don't, instead of cutting wages across the board or cutting hours across the board, why don't you, go back to the system where the person who works best and works well and shows the most improvement gets the most significant pay increases? And I know people will say, well, that's not fair. And it really is fair. Because I've like the retail industry in America, the customer service industry, people get a lot, really pissy. Excuse my language, but they get really, really pissy over, the way that, they get treated as far as customer service goes. Ideally, you would want someone who's serving you in like a retail and a shopping, like a major retail outlet or a restaurant, an eatery, to treat you with the respect that you feel you deserve. But on the other hand, having worked in these industries, it is tough to maintain that demeanor, especially in the face of some of the treatment that service industry employees get. Service industry employees get the worst of the worst treatment at times. For every like one or two people that are actually respectful about, dealing with employees like this, you know, their problems, like an undercooked steak, for instance, or something that didn't fit or was broken, say, for a return. You know, people get really, really bad attitudes with the retail, like, low employees, and even managers get a rough spot for this. And I just think it's ridiculous. And I've seen it firsthand. I've had it happen to me. I've had it happen to people near me. I've seen the way people get, and they get unreasonable. I mean, there are entire blogs and like probably YouTube channels where you hear these stories about people being asinine. And you can go look those up on your own time. That's, you know, I've spent more than enough time looking over them and living the experience. I don't want to, like, go into any specific anecdotes here. Anecdotes, not anecdotes. But it's just one of those things that, you know, if you want people to be, you know, give you the kind of service that you want, maybe you should think about giving them the respect that they deserve. I can totally understand having a problem with an employee who's giving you an attitude, but I think that it's more than fair to say that you need to watch your own attitude when dealing with these people as well. Because nothing nullifies your argument than being a hypocrite. Like, honestly, that's one of the worst things in the world, being a hypocrite. Don't do that. It's the one thing that people just hate. And I'm no exception. I hate a hypocrite. You know, and I try my best not to be one. So that's a thing that you need to be watchful for. But at the same time, why not reward the people like you used to? Oh, crap. Why not reward people like they used to in the old days, where if you do a good job, you know, you get the bonus increase to your wage. You know, maybe you can have a cap or something where, like, on a per year basis, you can only get so much extra in the long run. But, you know, to keep it fair to the other employees. But at the same time, you know, with other employees, you know, if they don't step up their game, if they're not really in this job to do what they've got to do and to make things work, you know, then maybe you shouldn't get paid, like, the best wages. You know, I get that from a standpoint, because, you know, I've been one of those employees, like, well, I'm doing way more work than her. Why should she get more money? You know, about coworkers that have just been, like, seniority is a big problem. You know, because you can look at seniority from a really, you know, you could take a couple of different standpoints on seniority, and I'm not really going to take one side over the other. I think seniority should be rewarded in its own way, but I think you have to balance that against, you know, people with seniority getting lazy over time because, hey, I just have to show up and work and I get paid this awesome, you know, wage or salary or whatever. And, you know, because that happens. I've seen it happen. People with seniority get lazy over time. It's not uncommon. So, and opportunities are a big problem too, because not every job, has opportunities for advancement. And especially sometimes not opportunities for advancement, like you have them, but they're not anything that's appealing to you. I've worked a lot of retail jobs. Retail, grocery, what have you. It's the most common job where I live, really. And one of the problems with it is that, retail is a fine job if you get a decent wage for it, and if you can handle the problems that come with it, like, I've learned to do, then by all means, if that's a thing that you can do it. But as much as, I don't mind retail as much as I used to because I know how to deal with it. I don't like, I would never want to be a manager. That is not something that interests me. And for very good reason. And it's that I don't want to be held liable for other people's mistakes. That's not something I'm interested in. And that's something that a manager has to do. They are held responsible for the mistakes of the people under them, and they're responsible for dealing with those mistakes on the employee's end as well. So not only do you have the discipline aspect of it, you also have the fact that no matter what you do, you're kind of screwed, and that just doesn't appeal to me at all. It's horrendous. And I really don't like it. And that's just my stance on it. Maybe I'm not the best qualified, but I think I've worked in retail long enough that it's not something that you can just shrug off. It's an issue. It's there. And I'm going to wrap this up soon, but I have like one or two final topics that I could probably do together, and that's nepotism and favoritism. And I've seen this. I've very much seen this. Like, I don't know. It's come up a couple of times on Facebook. I've seen it around the web. There's a I don't know if you call it a meme or just an infographic or this thing. It's this thing that says basically that, people generally don't leave jobs because they don't like the work. And they don't, they don't leave jobs because they hate the job or they hate the work or, this or that. The vast majority of people who leave a job is because they don't like their boss. And that seems like a cop-out, but it really isn't, because I've seen firsthand how this works. If you have a shitty boss, somebody who passes the blame or has, done things that don't fit with a good workplace, that don't work to a conducive work environment, then, what else are you going to do? You're just going to go someplace else that has a better work environment, really. And, I've worked with good bosses. I've worked with bad bosses. I've seen both sides of the coin. And I can tell you that there's legitimate cause for people to leave their work because their boss is making their life way harder than it needs to be. And one of the two ways I think that are both most prevalent and most annoying in that respect is nepotism and favoritism, two things that I have seen in my time working, and I've been working in the workforce for over 10 years now. I've seen quite a lot in that time, so I can tell you I've seen it, and it's in the worst usually in non-corporate settings where you have I don't know, I guess you'd call them family-owned shops or franchise stores, and here you also have that seniority coming into play as well. Um, um, where people are just, they've been there a while, people get friendly with them, or in the case of nepotism, where they're related and they're trying to make sure they have. What did my game just? Oh, here it goes. But it people are related or they get along well because they've worked for so long, or somebody just hits it off with the boss and they get better treatment, and it's not good for employee morale. You have a lot of people leave over that sort of thing, especially if the person who's getting the favorable treatment isn't, shall we say, the best worker. The only reason they're getting that preferential treatment is because the boss likes them or gets along well with them. I've seen that it happens, and it's annoying. It's really annoying. And, corporations tend to check that sort of thing. Like, it does happen in corporate settings. It's not as common, especially because corporate settings do have higher turnover rates, I would expect, in relation to these sort of things. So it's just one of those things that I don't think it's ever going to go away. But it's one of those things in a society like ours needs to be heavily monitored. It's not the easiest thing to monitor, but it needs to be monitored. It's a terrible thing for, other people involved. I don't really know how to explain it very well, I guess, but it's the worst kind of unfairness that I see in the workplace. Because if you get along well with someone as a boss, you're more willing to look past or to forgive their mistakes, whereas with someone who you don't know as well, you're going to punish them more, I want to say, harshly or maybe even fairly for their mistakes, however you want to put it. And it's just not one of those things that, in my experience, works out well for everyone involved. And it's just, I needed to get this stuff off my chest. So, if anybody does watch this, I don't know if anybody's going to watch this. Probably nobody will. But I really think that, it often needs to be said. That's all I can say, is it needs to be said. That these things are problems in the workplace, especially at the lowest levels of employment. And all I can really say is that, until a lot of these issues get worked out, there's nothing else that we can do. Keep bringing it to the attention of people who matter, and that's all really I can say. It's if you do re-watch this and you maybe have some thoughts that you want to share or some experiences that you want to share, I would enjoy reading them, I think. And I'm not a professional YouTuber. I'm not anybody special, but I would like to think that anybody can get their thoughts out there and maybe find people who have similar ideas, or and I'm never one to shy away from a debate. So if you have a differing opinion from me, I like to hear that too, civilly please, but yeah, I would like to hear that. I like that sort of thing. So it's getting late and I'm starting to get a little hoarse, so I'm gonna end this here in a second. So, but if you do watch, thank you very much for watching. It's much appreciated. And again, if you have any thoughts, feel free to share them. I like that sort of thing. So whatever, Oh, yeah, I'm just gonna end this now because all good.